Alrighty, everyone. Welcome to tonight's weather chat with Timmy. I am meteorologist Timmy Albertson here with you guys. The main thing that we're going to be talking about again tonight is going to be Hurricane Lee. We'll also take a little bit of a look at Hurricane Margot. Oh, that's also out in the Atlantic Ocean. And we do have another disturbance, as we talked about a couple days ago, coming off the West African coast that could very well develop into maybe our next tropical system. So we'll take a little bit of a look at that, albeit, again, it's not a tropical depression or anything at this point, just kind of a concentration of thunderstorms that is worth watching a little bit. Of course, most thunderstorms, in my opinion, are always worth watching. But with that in mind, before we begin with Hurricane Lee and everything, a couple little things I do want to go over with really quickly here is, after all, this is America's weather streaming channel. And of course, in case you're wondering what we are, we're actually a company that provides, we can provide forecasts for small businesses. So I guess we're a forecasting consulting company. You could say we do daily forecasts, weather updates, and we also are working on eventually doing it for individuals. So if you are an individual who kind of wants your own personal meteorologist, you can always feel free to reach out to us. Now, when it comes to the forecasting, I do Minnesota and Wisconsin. We have other meteorologists who also handle the other states across the United States. The states across the United States. Yeah, I guess that grammatically makes sense. So if it is something that you're interested in, you can always email us at info@americasweathersc.com, or you can always reach out to me too, and I can point you in the direction. But hey, if you do decide, you can have your own meteorologist, and if you happen to be watching from Minnesota or Wisconsin, that meteorologist would be yours truly. Rock on. All right, everyone, let's go ahead and we're going to take a little bit of a look here at Hurricane Lee. Now, Hurricane Lee is in the weakening phase. All right, it's not likely going to be getting any stronger than what it is. Yesterday, when we were looking at it, it had winds of about 115 miles an hour. It's now down to 105 miles an hour, which, according to our Sampras-Simpson wind speed chart, as you guys have probably become very familiar with now, that makes it a Category 2 hurricane. 105-mile-an-hour winds puts it kind of on the higher end of Category 2. But Lee is, like I said, going to probably continue to weaken here as it makes its way towards land. So let's go back here, and I'm sure that one of the things that you probably noticed here is that forecast track. So let's take a kind of a quick look at it here, and then we'll kind of come back a little bit more in the detail about it. But yes, right now it is expected that it will be reaching land as we go towards this weekend. Where exactly is still a little bit of uncertainty. Could be anywhere from eastern Maine to Nova Scotia, Canada, or possibly in between both and just pick New Brunswick. With that in mind, what's going to be interesting about this is we're going to be kind of dealing with two kind of different forecast offices. There's the National Hurricane Center. There's also the Canadian Hurricane Center there. So a little bit of a difference sometimes with their forecast, but generally they're pretty much the same. With that in mind, we'll take kind of, like I said, more of a look at the forecast. There are tropical storm watches that are in effect for parts of New England, as well as hurricane watches that are in effect for parts of Maine, which is also in New England. But you get the idea. So taking a look below here, this is the structure of Lee. Lee still has some convection ongoing with it, but again, it's not the strongest looking hurricane here. You might notice there's quite a few breaks in that cloud cover, and that's because it's absorbing a little bit of drier air, which is not good news if you're a hurricane. It's also starting to run into a little bit more wind shear, and eventually we'll be running into some cooler ocean temperatures. But what's to note here that's pretty interesting about Hurricane Lee, and actually this is kind of the case with a lot of bigger hurricanes, is that when they do begin to weaken, their wind field actually begins to expand a little bit. So, last week when we were talking about Hurricane Lee, we were talking about how it has a very small wind field. Well, that's because it was intensifying, and it was doing so rather quickly. But now that it's kind of weakening due to some physical processes, I'll spare you all the explanation for it now, but one of them has to do with angular momentum. But as this hurricane does kind of begin to weaken a little bit, the wind field does generally tend to expand a little bit. So even though the peak winds are down, the hurricane wind speed radius, I think that's right, yeah, I don't know how to say that. Anyways, it does expand outwards a little bit. So just kind of keep that in mind. When you take a look at these cones, it's always important to know here that what you're seeing is not where the hurricane's effects are going to be. It's where the center is going to be. So on that forecast map, you see kind of that shaded area. That's where the center could end up. As you can see, the hurricane force winds and even tropical storm force winds extend well out from the center. So just keep that in mind. That's why we see those tropical storm warnings in effect, or tropical storm watches, excuse me, in effect for parts of New England, even though the center is not expected to really reach Massachusetts, at least at this time. Again, those conditions could expand out a little bit there. So with that in mind, that is Hurricane Lee. We're going to come back to Lee here in just a moment, but for those of you who are Margot fans and you want to know how Margot's doing, yeah, this is an interesting one for sure. It's 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 having some problems, and the problems it's having is that there is a decent sized area of high pressure right up to its north, and as you can see, it's just really just hanging out. I mean, there's it's even on the satellite imagery, it's not the most defined hurricane. Winds right now about 90 miles an hour. What's it going to be doing over the next few days? Chilling out, just kind of hanging there. That's its forecast track you see right over there. A lot of those data points are kind of on top of each other. That is kind of expected. It's not going to be moving much. Eventually, that high will begin to kind of move away. That'll allow Margot to maybe resume a northeasterly motion, but by that point, it'll probably be a tropical storm, and it's probably not really going to be doing much else. We'll see if it holds up. Might get kind of absorbed a little bit into the jet stream. But yeah, that's Margot. So for any of you guys who have any money, as to whether or not it's going to reach the U.S., if you have any bets laid out, you're probably not going to win. Because Margot probably won't be going anywhere over the next few days. Margot, rock on. All right, let's come back here to Hurricane Lee. So for those of you who have interests up and down the East Coast, whether you got a vacation home there or whether it's a place you frequent, as far as places, like Florida, North Carolina, the Outer Banks, Virginia Beach area. Listen, Lee is going to be staying right now. We expect that Lee is going to stay far away from that. The most they could maybe get are maybe a little bit in the way of increased waves on parts of the Outer Banks, but that's going to be about it. And even that might be a little bit of a stretch there without going into too much detail. But for those of you who might have interest in New England, or you frequent that area, or you're from that area, or whatever the reasoning may be, could get a little interesting up and down the coast. Now, it's important to note here that Hurricane Lee is going to be weakening. So right now, it's not going to be making a landfall of 105 mile an hour winds. It's probably going to be more or less making landfall with winds of around 70 or 80 miles an hour. Now, again, that sounds like a lot in the terms of wind speed, but you also got to keep in mind, especially when we deal with the Canadian Maritimes, is that this area is used to it. All right. They get 70 mile an hour winds sometimes from some of those nor'easters and those strong, low pressures that just track up that aren't even hurricanes. So, this is an area that is more frequent to these type of storms than you could probably imagine. I mean, it's the North Atlantic. So, however, with a hurricane or even those stronger storms, there is still obviously some risks of some storm surge, especially when it comes to hurricanes. High waves and, of course, gusty winds, which could have its own effects, local power outages, that kind of stuff. So this is not likely going to be a massive major hurricane when it makes landfall, but it probably will certainly be a little bit stronger than normal storms that happen their way through here. So what we're expecting, like I said, is probably going to be a minimal hurricane when it actually does make its way up towards the far New England coast or the Canadian Maritimes, or both. So we're not expecting it to have the 105 mile an hour winds you see now. Again, probably 70 or 80 miles an hour. Regardless, it's going to be moving pretty quickly too when it does reach there. So you can see on those data points that, Saturday evening, it's hanging just off the coast. But by the time we get towards Sunday evening, it's now past New Brunswick and working its way towards Newfoundland. So that's kind of how things are going to be shaping up with that. So the tropical storm warning that's in effect, or the tropical storm watch, excuse me, I keep saying tropical storm watch. The tropical storm watch that's in effect for New England, again, is basically what that is they're expecting tropical storm force winds, within, what is the next 36, 40, no, today is Wednesday. Yeah, so basically within the next 48 hours or so. There is probably going to be some high waves associated with that, naturally a little bit in the way of some rain. It looks like right now probably where the closer the center is going to be, like I said, it's going to be eastern Maine to the coast of New Brunswick to Nova Scotia. So it's going to be somewhere in that area. So, not only that, but these areas also get tides too. So that'll be kind of interesting to see how it might line up with some of the tides. But Again, strongest winds are probably going to be right, along the coastline, and it is going to begin to weaken pretty quickly once it does hit land. So we're going to flip over here to the radar screen here, and we're going to take a little bit more of a look here at the track here. So right now, Lee is beginning to make that northerly turn. We took a look at yesterday with that ridge that was kind of blocking it, preventing it from making that turn. Now that ridge is kind of beginning to break a little bit. As a matter of fact, let's see here if I can't maybe pull that up for you guys here really quickly. See if we can't take a quick little look here at the atmospheric conditions that are surrounding it. Again, for those of you who just want to see more about the track, don't worry, we're going to get there. We are certainly going to be getting there in just a quick moment here. But for those of you who like some of the meteorological explanations here, we'll reward you for your viewing this, and we'll take a look here really quickly at that map. Sorry, I had to pull it up. That's why I had to flip the screen. So there we go. Here's the isobar, as mentioned. We can take a look at this yesterday. This is what you see your H's and your L's. Here's the big L, and here's a big H over here. So again, that ridge is beginning to break a little bit, and we're likely going to be seeing Lee now making that northerly turn. Lows cannot move a high pressure, so highs are always the dominant one, but as that high begins to move out of the way, Lee is going to take that, and it's going to run with it. There's also a little bit of an upper level trough that is swinging its way now through the eastern U.S. This was the trough that we looked at last night that helped to bring some rain showers across parts of Minnesota, the cooler air that's behind it. So this trough is now tracking its way towards the New England coastline. So this is what Lee is going to start to work with. As that Lee begins to move closer to that trough, it's going to get kind of caught up in it, and that's going to help to accelerate further up towards the north at a kind of decent speed. This trough is also helping to kind of weaken that ridge that's been blocking it a little bit here. So that's kind of the setup here, what's going on right now. So some of those cooler temperatures across parts of the Midwest. We had, again, temperatures last night here up in Minnesota in the upper 20s, not too far away from where I was this morning. We had a little bit of frost here, and temperatures probably going to drop again tonight. But it's important to keep in mind here that, it's all courtesy kind of this trough moving through and the surface high pressure that's associated with it right behind it. So again, as we move our way through the rest of the forecast, Lee tracking north, all right? The water temperatures are also going to be a lot cooler up there. Right now, it's still kind of in some warmer water temperatures, but the further north it's going to get, especially once it passes the Gulf Stream, are going to not be very favorable for it. There's also some drier air in the way, and that's why when we took a look at the satellite imagery here, for Lee, I'll pull Lee's graphic back up here. You can see some of the absence and some of that cloud cover, and you can even see it a little bit here, albeit it is hard to see. But you can kind of see these little gaps right in there. That's some drier air being pulled into the hurricane. So that's kind of how that is shaping up to be. If we were to take a look at one of the models, and as I've mentioned before, and I will mention this every time I show it, do not take these models exactly as is. The only reason I show you guys these models is to just help to illustrate, because even though they might not necessarily be correct, exactly, generally they tend to have the atmosphere layout at least pretty decently shown here. So it's just a good illustration. So as I turn off my video here, you're going to see that as we move our way forward, there's Lee right there. There's that upper level trough. Whoa, advanced it. There we go. There's that upper level trough that we just took a look at on the maps. Again, there's Lee moving towards it, kind of gets pulled into it. There's going to be a lot of wind shear up around there, and that is also going to help to weaken Lee. There's that ridge of high pressure backed off towards the north, kind of keeping Margot pretty steady, and then that high also begins to just kind of move out and then redevelop down to the south. That's going to maybe help Margot to eventually begin to move again. So that's kind of the setup right now of what's going on. Now, that other disturbance I did mention really quickly here before we go back to Lee, that one disturbance that I was talking about coming off the West African coast, you can kind of actually see it here on the model. It's right down there. It's this little guy here. We'll see what that develops into. Could very well become our next named system, but it's also going to be dealing with that high pressure. That's going to help to kind of keep it down a little bit. And then we'll see it maybe trying to make a northwesterly turn. Now, by this point, folks, we're looking pretty far out. So there's still a lot of uncertainties that can go with it there. Will it make its way towards land, or will it decide it wants to also turn straight to the north here, or something? We'll just kind of have to wait and see. But it looks like as we go into next week, once we get done with Lee, we'll at least have another storm to keep us entertained here for a few moments every evening. So let's take a look here. We'll go back over to Hurricane Lee there. There it is. Again, it is weakening, but keep an eye on it there. All right. pretty interesting stuff, huh? Now, as I mentioned, it's kind of interesting that we got kind of somewhat two slightly different forecasts for the same storm, and part of the reason for that happens to do with the fact that it could be going to Canada, and generally their forecast is lining up pretty much with the National Hurricane Center's here. It is interesting, though, that their latest pressure reading that they had was 953 millibars, whereas the Hurricane Center had it at 952. That, it's still a low pressure. I just think that's kind of interesting. Anyways, so right now for Canada, we're taking a look now over the Canadian stuff here now, for those of you wondering. So this is the Canadian Maritimes. For those of you who don't know your Canadian geography too well, the three provinces that are generally considered the Maritimes, there is New Brunswick. Ow, I just hit my hand on the table. There are New Brunswick, which borders Maine, Nova Scotia, which is where the city of Halifax is, and then there's Prince Edward Island. There's also Newfoundland, which is over here, and that's connected with Labrador, another province up there. But for the main part of this forecast, we're just mainly going to be focusing on New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. So they do actually have statements out right now, but they don't have an exact forecast. So far, their forecast is just rain for the weekend with maybe some windy conditions here, but they will likely begin to put out their outlook for some of their towns and whatnot. So that'll be pretty interesting to see here. So if we just kind of read through what their text has right now, they got Lee is moving to the north at about 25 kilometers an hour, which again would put it right around the 10 mile an hour. Actually, if we really want to get particular, for those of you who don't like your kilometers, 15 miles an hour. All right. Winds about 175 kilometers an hour. I believe they actually have it labeled at about 95 knots, which might actually put it at 110 miles an hour. Again, just slight differences here, but they are expecting that as it approaches, it will once again have its wind field expanding. So let's take a look here at that wind field on the weather map here. This is it. That's a big wind field. That's a lot bigger than what we saw this time last week, and that's a pretty decent sized wind field. As a matter of fact, let's measure it out here. The hurricane force winds, which is the orange color here, those extend right now about 110 miles out from the center. That's a pretty big wind radius. So even though the winds are going down, the hurricane force wind field has expanded quite a bit. Ironically, it hasn't expanded enough to get those tropical storm force winds to some of these buoys, but let's take a look here. 41049. Looks like it is getting dark there. They're getting gusts right now about 43 miles an hour, though the sustained winds are at about 31 miles an hour. So again, not tropical storm force wind, but certainly gusting to that. And so again, we're looking pretty far out here from the center of Lee. Let's take a look at how far away is that buoy. It's about 280 miles away from the center there of Lee. So again, kind of keep in mind here some of the distances we're dealing with. It might not be necessarily that extreme when it does reach land, but again, it's a pretty wide wind field there. So even if the center doesn't reach a particular location, they could still be getting some pretty decent effects. And that's why we have that tropical storm watch that is in effect up and down parts of the New England coastline. That includes the city of Boston. It includes southern, it's going to be what, Newport, Rhode Island, and South Kingston, Rhode Island, as well as Plymouth, Massachusetts, and again, like I said, as mentioned, the Boston area, going up towards the coast of New Hampshire, the one county it's got there, and then as well as the coast of Maine. There's also a hurricane watch. It's kind of hard to see by this cone here, but it does include at least two of those counties over in Maine. So there you go. That's why. So we take a look at the track here. They expect the center is going to stay well away from New England, but because that wind field could be pretty wide, at least grazing the coast of New England there. So pretty interesting nonetheless. All righty, everyone. So with that in mind, that's a look at Lee. It's going to be pretty interesting as we go through the next couple of days. That as it always is. But it will be pretty interesting. And like I said, now it's going to start kind of picking up some speed, but it will be weakening. So I think what will be very interesting will be to see exactly how much this tropical storm force wind field does actually expand a little bit. As a matter of fact, there is also I forgot to mention this, there is a tropical storm warning for Bermuda. Even though the center is going to be staying way, way away from Bermuda, we'll be getting grazed by some of those tropical storm winds. So that's why there's a tropical storm warning that's up for Bermuda. So be pretty interesting to see here. Let's see, this particular buoy, which is right now going to be in the path of at least some of those tropical storm force winds. Pretty quiet there right now, albeit looks to be there are some clouds there. And oh, well, yeah, that would line up with the satellite imagery. But yeah, that could be a pretty interesting video as we go into tomorrow's weather update. Heck, it might actually be passing right by it. The center might be, in its closest approach to that as when we do tomorrow's weather chat. So that'd be pretty cool to see, nonetheless. But again, it will be weakening. So here we go. As it makes its way into Saturday afternoon here. Again, the Hurricane Center is expecting winds of 75 miles an hour, gusting up to about 90 miles an hour. But again, it'll be weakening as it does, once it goes beyond that. So we're not expecting this to be a 105 mile an hour wind landfall hurricane here. Probably, borderline, low end hurricane or maybe a strong tropical storm. So kind of cool. Alrighty, everyone. I think that just about covers everything we needed to go over to tonight. If you guys have any questions, you can always feel free to leave them in the comments or message me. And as mentioned, if you are interested in getting daily forecasts for you or your business, you can always feel free to reach out to us. Put that title card up earlier, but I'll put it up one more time just so you have it there. And again, you can email us at info@americasweathersc.com. Our website, I believe we are still going through a slight renovation with the website, but regardless, you get the idea. All right, that's all I got for you guys tonight. All righty, everyone. Well, hopefully you enjoyed tonight's weather chat, and hopefully you learned a few things. Like I said, we'll do this again tomorrow evening, and we'll see here. It does look like they might have an intermediate update for Lee later this evening, so I'll probably do a quick update with that when it does happen. So make sure you look out for that. It'll just be solely based on quick little update on the track and everything. So make sure you look back for that. With that in mind, everyone, I hope you all have a good rest of your evening. Today is Wednesday. We made it through the middle part of the week. Now we got Thursday and Friday, and then we got this guy, Lee, to look forward to as we go into next weekend. That'll certainly be, or into this weekend. So that'll be certainly pretty fun. I think it'll be fun. All right. Hope you all have a good rest of your evening, everyone. Look forward to seeing you back here for tomorrow evening's weather chat. Have a good one, everyone.